Imagine this. A government runs out of money. Not tomorrow, not in theory, right now. Schools need funding, salaries are due, debt payments are ticking like a clock. But instead of panic, nothing happens. Markets stay calm, banks stay open, life goes on. Because there's a quiet understanding in the background, a deal that isn't written in law books and rarely explained out loud. This is the silent deal between governments and banks, and right now, it matters more than ever. Every few weeks, governments around the world borrow enormous amounts of money, not from taxpayers, not directly from foreign countries, from banks. In return, banks get something that looks almost magical, a promise backed by the state itself, government bonds. On paper, it's simple. The government needs cash, banks have cash, a trade happens. But the real story starts after that trade. Because banks don't treat government bonds like normal investments. They treat them like something closer to cash itself. In many countries, these bonds are considered risk-free, meaning banks don't have to set aside much safety capital to hold them. So banks buy a lot of them, sometimes mountains of them. Why wouldn't they? The bonds pay interest, they're easy to trade, and regulators smile when banks hold them. It's the safest asset in the room. At least, that's the story. Now here's where the deal turns interesting. When banks buy government bonds, they help governments keep spending without raising taxes. No angry voters, no hard budget cuts. In exchange, governments build systems that protect banks. Deposit insurance, emergency loans, bailouts when things go wrong. No official handshake, just behavior. Over time, both sides become dependent on each other. Governments need banks to fund deficits. Banks need governments to guarantee stability. It works beautifully until it doesn't. Let's talk about the uncomfortable math. Banks often fund long-term government debt with short-term money, deposits that can leave tomorrow, markets that can freeze overnight. As long as confidence holds, this mismatch is invisible. But confidence is a fragile thing. If investors start questioning a government's ability to pay, bond prices fall. When bond prices fall, banks take losses. When banks look weak, governments feel pressure to step in, which makes government finances worse. A feedback loop. This isn't a theory. We've seen it. Europe, early 2010s. Banks loaded up on their own government's bonds. When Greece wobbled, banks wobbled. When banks wobbled, governments panicked. Suddenly, risk-free didn't feel so free. And yet, after the crisis, the deal didn't end. It quietly continued. Why? Because breaking it is painful. If banks stopped buying government debt, interest rates would spike, budgets would explode, politics would turn ugly fast. If governments stopped supporting banks, the financial system would seize, payments would fail, savings would be at risk. So, both sides pretend the arrangement is stable. They used softer words, liquidity facilities, market operations, financial stability tools, but the substance remains. Now here's the irony. The system is sold as boring, technical, managed by experts, yet it quietly shapes inflation, taxes, housing markets, and job security. When governments borrow cheaply, spending grows. When banks feel protected, risk grows. When risk grows quietly, crises arrive wildly. And most people only notice at the end, when prices rise, when services get cut, when bailouts make headlines. The hype says this partnership keeps the system safe. The reality is more fragile. It works because everyone believes it works. That belief is reinforced by central banks, regulations, and political promises. But belief isn't the same as math. Debt doesn't disappear. It moves. It concentrates. It waits. Zoom out far enough, and the silent deal looks less like cooperation and more like mutual dependence. Two powerful institutions locked together, each too big to ignore, each too scared to let go. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If banks rely on governments to stay safe, and governments rely on banks to stay solvent, who is really in charge when the system is under stress? And what happens the day both sides need saving at the same time?